A girl travels to the 1960s by dreaming, only to get haunted by ghosts from the past. A young girl named Eloise, nicknamed Ellie, obsessed with the 1960s era and environment, wants to become a fashion designer. After getting enrolled in a fashion college, Ellie moves into an apartment in Soho, where she starts dreaming about living in the 1960s as a woman named Sandy. Ellie starts living Sandy's glamorous life, but everything starts becoming darker when Ellie encounters ghosts in her room. Soon, Ellie finds out Sandy is real, and she was murdered in her room while her killer was at large. Strap in, movie enthusiasts, it's recap time. Today, we will be explaining a horror mystery film called Last Night in Soho from the year 2021, which shows how dreams can unveil the horrors of humans. I hope you enjoy the video, so let's start. In the beginning of the movie, we meet our protagonist, Eloise Ellie Turner, who is dancing in her house. Ellie is a young girl who lives with her grandmother, Peggy. Ellie is studying to be a fashion designer, and she is obsessed with the 1960s era. Ellie's mom committed suicide, but Ellie still sees her in the mirror. Ellie's admissions application gets accepted at the London College of Fashion, so she decides to move to London. Her grandmother, Peggy, advises Ellie to stay safe and away from bad influences. Ellie assures her that she'll be fine, and the next morning, she heads out to London. Upon arrival in London, Ellie joins a hostel where she meets Jocasta, her roommate. Jocasta is also an orphan like Ellie, but she is a bully. The girls share about themselves and get to know each other. Later, Jocasta introduces Ellie to her friends but indirectly makes fun of Ellie's dress. Ellie goes out with Jocasta and her friends and tries to adjust with them, but feels left out. She goes to the washroom, and moments later, Jocasta and her friends enter the washroom as well. Not knowing Ellie's in the stall next to them, Jocasta trash talks about Ellie and her mom, which disheartens Ellie. Afterward, on her way out, Ellie notices a creepy old man who gives her a smirk. Ellie returns to her hostel, only to find out that Jocasta has thrown a party and tons of people are at their hostel. Ellie meets a young man, John, at the party. John is also studying at Ellie's college, and he's Ellie's classmate. Ellie wakes up late for her class and rushes to the college. She finds all the seats taken except one, next to John. After the class, Ellie decides to move from the hostel because she isn't pleased with her new environment. She finds an apartment to rent in Soho, owned by Ms. Collins, and decides to live with her. At night, she settles in, plays old music, and goes to bed. She dreams about going to London in the 1960s. She enters a club called Café de Paris. There, she sees a young blonde girl in the mirror as her reflection. This girl is Sandy, short for Alexandra, and she wants to become a singer and a dancer. Sandy walks into the club as Ellie now turns into her reflection. Sandy meets with a talent manager called Jack, while Ellie observes her from the mirrors. Sandy tells Jack that she wants to become a performer, so Jack asks for a demonstration. Sandy happily obliges and dances with him. Jack offers to find a gig for Sandy, and they both then proceed to make out in the phone booth inside the bar, and afterward Jack drops her home. Sandy enters her room, which happens to be Ellie's room. Sandy goes to bed while Ellie watches her. She tries to touch Sandy, but Ellie's alarm goes off, so she wakes up. In her class, Ellie begins to design a dress inspired by Sandy. Shortly after, Jocasta points out a hickey on Ellie's shoulder. Ellie realizes the hickey is in the exact spot where Jack bit Sandy in her dream. After the class, Ellie returns home but gets approached by John. John wants to hang with her, but Ellie tells her she has plans, which are to dream about Sandy again. At night, she dreams where she's Sandy again. Jack arrives outside her apartment and takes her to a club called Rialto. Jack has arranged a private audition for Sandy with the Rialto Club's owner. Sandy sings on the stage while Ellie witnesses Sandy's talent. The club owner gets impressed and hires Sandy. Sandy and Jack exit the club and kiss. They return to Sandy's apartment, but Ellie's alarm goes off again. Now, she gets her hair colored blonde, just like Sandy, and starts talking like Sandy in class with her teacher. Ellie even starts dressing like Sandy, and after shopping, she discovers the same Rialto Club building she saw in her dream, realizing it's real, and perhaps Sandy's life was real too. Ellie is running out of money, so she goes to a pub to find work. She meets with Carol, the pub owner. Carol hires Ellie for night shifts because of her college. Meanwhile, in the pub, a silver-haired gentleman notices Ellie, and it's the same man Ellie saw in the beginning of the film. After she leaves the pub, the old chap approaches Ellie, claiming he recognizes her. Ellie returns home and dreams about Sandy again. Ellie is sitting in a hall full of men where someone else is leading the performance, while Sandy is dancing in the corner. Ellie watches Sandy's performance and realizes Sandy isn't living the life she dreads. Sandy gets furious in her dressing room before Jack arrives. Jack introduces Sandy to Mr. Pointer, a rich man who wants to spend a night alone with Sandy. Sandy gets furious and leaves when Jack allows Mr. Pointer. Jack tries to persuade Sandy, but she turns into Ellie, who refuses. Ellie tries to leave the club from backstage, only to realize the girls have to sell themselves to rich men to secure their futures. Ellie runs from the exit door, which takes her back to her room. There, she finds Sandy sleeping after fornicating with Mr. Pointer. Mr. Pointer enters the room and tries to wake Sandy, but Ellie yells at him to back off. Ellie's alarm goes off and she wakes up in her bed, where suddenly Mr. Pointer grabs her arm. But that was also a dream, and Ellie now wakes up alone in her room. In her class, Ellie gets plagued by Jack's true intention, so she starts sabotaging her dress. At the pub, Ellie gets a call from her grandmother, Peggy, who wants to check up on her. Ellie ends the call and gets confronted by the silver-haired man again. This time, he knows Ellie's name and hands Ellie her Sandy-inspired dress she drew. Ellie questions how he knows her name, to which he replies that it's his business to know all the pretty girls around here. Later at night, Ellie sits in her room when suddenly her music stereo turns on and Jack bursts through her door. He drags Ellie to a club where she turns into Sandy again. Jack orders Sandy to dance around and approach men. Sandy dances and drinks while meeting different men, one after another. At last, a mysterious and handsome man named Lindsay meets Sandy. He tells Sandy to quit this job because she's better than this, while Ellie watches her as her reflection. Ellie feels bad for Sandy and starts pounding the mirror, begging Sandy to look at her. She breaks the mirror and grabs Sandy, but wakes up back in her room. Ellie sees Sandy in the mirror, lying on her bed, while multiple ghosts of Sandy's client approach Ellie. Ellie gets appalled and runs out of her room. She takes a breath and enters her room, only to find dozens of ghosts standing in her room. Ellie now goes to a Halloween party with John. At the party, Jocasta arrives with her friends and hands John and Ellie alcohol. Ellie dances with John and gets drunk. She starts seeing Sandy, Jack, and the ghosts in the club. She gets scared and decides to run off from the party with John. She kisses John and heads back to her place to make love. But Ellie starts hallucinating. She witnesses Jack stabbing Sandy to death, while John freaks out because he can't see any of that. Ms. Collins arrives and forces John to run away from her house. In the morning, Ellie asks Ms. Collins if she knows anyone named Sandy who might have lived in her room before. Ms. Collins informs her that a lot of girls have stayed in her room, and she doesn't remember their names. Ellie now tries to focus on her classes, but she keeps seeing a bloodied Sandy, Jack, and ghosts of Sandy's victims everywhere. Eventually, she goes to the police and confesses everything. She tells them about her dreams, the ghosts, and the places she saw in her dream that exist in the real world. Ellie now wonders if Jack is still alive and on the loose. She connects the dots and thinks the silver-haired old man is Jack. The police don't believe her and consider her crazy, so she decides to take matters into her own hands. She goes to her college library and searches old records about Sandy's murder. John arrives and helps her after Ellie finally tells him about everything she's experiencing. They don't find anything on Sandy, but Ellie starts seeing ghosts again and tries to stab one, but John stops her because Ellie was mistakenly about to stab Jocasta. Ellie runs away and gets haunted by dozens of ghosts on the streets. Eventually, she notices the old man with silver hair going into her pub. Ellie goes to her pub and confronts him about Sandy. The old man reveals to her that he didn't murder Sandy but tried to warn her. Ellie doesn't believe him and constantly accuses him while getting furious. She drives him out of the pub, where he tells her she should question Alex about Sandy. Suddenly, a car hits the old man, and he dies in the accident. Carol arrives and reveals the old man is Lindsay, the man who advised Sandy to quit her profession. Ellie realizes she made a mistake, thinking Lindsay was Jack. Ellie now decides to leave London and heads back to her apartment with John to inform Ms. Collins about her departure. Ms. Collins tells her to relax and gives her a cup of tea while apologizing for smoking. She informs Ellie that the police came to her house, asking about Ellie and the girl who died in her room. Ms. Collins reveals that Sandy didn't die because she is Sandy. Her first name is Alexandra, and Jack didn't stab her. Instead, she stabbed him. She reveals that she killed all those men who fornicated with her out of revenge and hid them in the walls and floor of the upstairs room. Ellie promises to keep her mouth sealed, but Alexandra reveals she poisoned Ellie's tea. She promises not to stab Ellie, but John checks up on Ellie. Ellie knocks down the table while trying to get up. Alexandra's lit cigarette was on the table, and it fell into a cardboard box, setting up a fire. Meanwhile, Alexandra invites John in and stabs him. Ellie tries to fight back but falls on the stairs after getting a cut on her hand. Ellie goes upstairs, where all the ghosts appear and beg Ellie to murder Alexandra. Alexandra enters the room and sees all the ghosts, including Jax. Jax slaps Alexandra, which makes her feel the weight of her crimes. Miss Collins almost cuts her throat, but Ellie snatches the knife. The fire had spread throughout the house and reached Ellie's room while the police and medics arrived. Miss Collins turns into a young Sandy, and Ellie tries to convince her to live. Sandy refuses, claiming she doesn't want to live in prison. Ellie runs away and tries to rescue John, but the medics break in and rescue them while Sandy burns in her room. Some time later, Ellie has become a fashion designer and is now running her own fashion show. Backstage, Ellie sees her mother in a mirror before John and Peggy congratulate Ellie for her success. Afterward, Ellie looks in the mirror and sees Sandy in the reflection, and the movie ends here. I hope you liked the story recap. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.